and we learn it was up to, in the worst year, 1 million, although we haven't yet got the revisions. By the time they come in, it almost certainly will be over 1 million. The anticipated cost of the 800,000 plus who will qualify for indefinite leave to remain over the course of the next 3 to 4 years, the anticipated cost of this group of people.
The right-wing revolution, how reform and the Tories could topple Starmer. Good evening, and welcome back to UK Connors, where we dissect the machinations of Westminster with the precision of a surgeon and the wit of a seasoned political observer. If you're not already subscribed, do yourself a favor and hit that subscribe button now, because what I'm about to reveal will fundamentally alter how you view the future of British politics. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single episode of what's coming next. The political landscape of Britain has just been hit by a seismic shift that has sent shockwaves through the corridors of power, and frankly, it's about bloody time. A new poll has emerged that should have Keir Starmer reaching for the antacids and Labour strategists burning the midnight oil in panic. The numbers don't lie, and what they are telling us is nothing short of revolutionary. Picture this: Nigel Farage and Kemi Badenoch, two figures who have spent considerable time at each other's throats, suddenly finding themselves in a position where their political marriage could spell doom for Labour's grip on power. The latest polling data, conducted by none other than Conservative peer Lord Ashcroft and published in the Mail on Sunday, reveals a truth that the Westminster establishment has been desperately trying to ignore. A united right could not only challenge Labour but absolutely demolish them at a ballot box. The figures are stark and unforgiving. A reformed Tory coalition would lead Labour by 7 percentage points. 7 points. In the brutal arithmetic of British politics, that's not just a lead, that's a landslide in waiting. But here's where it gets particularly fascinating, and this is where the political cognoscenti need to pay very close attention indeed. The poll reveals something counterintuitive that speaks volumes about the current state of British political allegiances. When polled separately, Reform UK and the Conservative Party's combined vote share would theoretically be higher than what they'd achieve in coalition. On paper, you'd expect 2 plus 2 to equal 4, but politics isn't mathematics, and human psychology is far more complex than simple arithmetic. The reality is that political coalitions create their own dynamics, their own appeal, and their own limitations. Some voters who might support one party independently become hesitant when faced with a formal alliance. It's a political equivalent of preferring the individual ingredients but finding the finished dish less palatable. Yet here's a kicker that should have Labour strategists waking up in cold sweats. Even with this coalition discount, a united right would still command enough support to send Sir Keir Starmer packing from Downing Street. The implications of this are staggering when you consider the broader trajectory of British politics over the past decade. The appetite for such an alliance isn't merely theoretical wishful thinking from political commentators seeking to fill column inches. The polling reveals genuine grassroots support for this concept. 61% of Conservative voters would back what the poll terms a Unite the Right coalition. That's not a slim majority of diehard activists. That's a commanding mandate from the Tory base. Meanwhile, half of Reform voters would support such an arrangement, which, given Reform's insurgent status and typically more uncompromising voter base, represents a remarkable level of pragmatic thinking. The intellectual architect of this potential alliance has found an unlikely champion in former Conservative MP Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg, a figure whose very presence in any political equation adds both gravitas and a certain theatrical flair that British politics so desperately needs. Rees-Mogg has been among the most vocal advocates for a deal between the two parties, and his reasoning is as sharp as his tailoring. He understands what many in the Conservative Party hierarchy seem determined to ignore, that ideological purity is a luxury the right can no longer afford when facing an organized and increasingly confident Labour Party. But here's where the plot thickens, and frankly, where it becomes rather delicious from a political drama perspective. Both Nigel Farage and Kemi Badenoch have made it abundantly clear that they have absolutely no intention of entertaining any formal agreements. It's the political equivalent of two people who would make perfect dance partners steadfastly refusing to acknowledge the music is playing. Farage, ever the political entrepreneur, likely sees little benefit in sharing the limelight or diluting his brand by associating too closely with what many of his supporters view as a failed Conservative establishment. His entire political persona is built on being the outsider, the insurgent, the voice of those who feel betrayed by traditional Westminster politics. Why would he risk that carefully cultivated image for the sake of a coalition that might constrain his ability to speak truth to power? Bad Enoch, on the other hand, faces a different calculation entirely. As a leader of what was until recently the natural party of government, she's fighting to maintain the Conservative Party's identity as a distinct political force rather than merely the acceptable face of right-wing politics. Admitting the need for an alliance with Reform will be tantamount to acknowledging that a Conservative Party can no longer compete on its own merits, a devastating psychological blow for a party that has governed Britain for the majority of the past century. Yet the political winds are shifting with the force of a hurricane, and recent events suggest that this theoretical alliance might be closer to reality than either leader publicly admits. The defection of Danny Kruger to Reform UK last week represents far more than a simple change of party allegiance. It's a seismic crack in the foundation of Conservative unity that could well become a devastating fault line. Kruger's switch is particularly significant because it's not some peripheral backbench figure looking for attention or a disgruntled has-been seeking relevance. He's the MP for East Wiltshire, and his decision to join Farage represents the first time a sitting Conservative MP has made the leap to Reform. The symbolism is powerful, but the practical implications are even more profound. What makes Kruger's defection particularly intriguing is his new role within the Reform hierarchy. He has been tasked with leading Reform preparation for government, not preparation for opposition, mind you, but preparation for actually governing. The growing sense of exodus from what Kruger termed the conventional centre-right party represents more than just political opportunism or personal ambition. It reflects a fundamental realignment of British Conservative politics that has been building for years but has now reached a critical mass. The Conservative Party, for all its historical achievements and institutional weight, is increasingly seen by its own MPs as a vehicle that can no longer deliver on the promises that brought them into politics. Kimi Badenoch's response to Kruger's defection was telling in its very restraint. She acknowledged that her party was experiencing a rough and bumpy time, language that, in the understated world of British political discourse, translates to an admission that the Conservative Party is in serious trouble. For a party leader to publicly acknowledge difficulties is a political equivalent of a general admitting that the battle isn't going according to plan. But here's what makes this entire situation so fascinating from a strategic perspective. Both Farage and Badenoch are playing a game of political chicken, each calculating that the other will eventually blink first. Farage believes that Conservative MPs will continue to defect to Reform as it becomes increasingly clear that the Tory brand is toxic with voters. Meanwhile, Badenoch is betting that Reform will eventually hit a ceiling of support that makes them dependent on Conservative cooperation to achieve meaningful power. The problem with this mutual standoff is that it ignores the fundamental dynamics of British electoral politics. The first-past-the-post system that governs Westminster elections is notoriously unforgiving to divided political movements. Two parties splitting the same voter base doesn't result in shared influence. It results in mutual destruction and the victory of their common opponent. This is precisely the scenario that should have Labour strategists celebrating. But here's why they shouldn't be popping the champagne just yet. The polling data suggests that British voters are increasingly sophisticated in their political calculations. They understand a divided right means a strengthened left, and they are showing a remarkable willingness to support coalitions and alliances that might once have seemed politically unthinkable. The 7-point lead that a Reform Tory coalition would enjoy over Labour isn't just a number, it's a roadmap to power. In the brutal mathematics of Westminster elections, that kind of margin translates to a commanding parliamentary majority. It means not just defeating Labour, but potentially reducing them to their traditional rump and urban constituencies while sweeping the suburbs and countryside that determine British general elections. What makes this polling particularly credible is its source. Lord Ashcroft isn't some partisan hack grinding axes for personal gain. His polling operation has earned respect across the political spectrum for its methodological rigor and predictive accuracy. When Ashcroft polls reveal a 7-point lead for a hypothetical coalition, serious politicians take notice because they know the data is solid. The implications extend far beyond mere electoral arithmetic. A Reform Tory coalition would represent a fundamental realignment of British conservatism around themes that have been marginalised by the metropolitan elite but remain powerful with ordinary. Yet both Farage and Badenoch continue their elaborate dance of mutual rejection, each convinced that they hold the stronger hand in this high-stakes political poker game. The irony is palpable. Two leaders whose combined forces could dominate British politics for a generation are instead ensuring that their mutual opposition hands victory to a Labour Party that has done nothing to earn it beyond existing as the only viable alternative to a fractured right. The question that should be keeping political observers awake at night isn't whether a Reform Tory alliance would be electorally successful. The polling data makes that abundantly clear. The question is whether British conservatism is mature enough to prioritise victory over ego, substance over style, and the national interest over personal ambition. Danny Kruger's defection might well be remembered as a moment when the dam finally broke. The first Conservative MP to make the jump has created a pathway that others will surely follow. Each defection weakens the Conservative Party's claim to be the natural home of British conservatism, while strengthening Reform's argument that it represents the future of the right. The dynamics are accelerating in ways that should alarm anyone committed to effective opposition to Labour's progressive agenda. While the right fragments and feuds, Labour consolidates its position and prepares for what could be a generation of uncontested power. The tragic irony is that the tools for preventing this scenario are readily available. They just require the kind of political maturity and strategic thinking that seems increasingly rare in contemporary British politics. Lord Ashcroft's polling doesn't just reveal electoral possibilities. It exposes a fundamental dysfunction of a conservative movement that would rather lose separately than win together. 61% of Conservative voters support a coalition with Reform, yet their leadership rejects any such arrangement. Half of Reform voters would back an alliance with the Tories, yet Farage dismisses a possibility. This isn't principled politics. It's political suicide masquerading as ideological purity. The establishment media continues to treat Reform as a temporary aberration that will fade once a Conservative Party finds its footing. This analysis fundamentally misunderstands the nature of the political realignment taking place across the Western world. Reform isn't an accident or a protest. It's the inevitable result of mainstream Conservative parties failing to address the concerns of their own voters. The 7-point lead revealed in the Ashcroft polling represents the electoral potential of a unified right, but it also reveals the scale of the opportunity being wasted by petty political calculations and personal ambitions. British voters are ready for a Conservative coalition, yet Conservative politicians who lack the vision and courage to deliver it. Immigration continues to dominate voter concerns, yet the Conservative Party offers only marginally different policies from Labour. Economic sovereignty remains a priority for millions of British voters, yet the Tories have presided over deeper integration into global institutions. Cultural conservatism resonates across traditional party boundaries, yet Conservative politicians seem more comfortable appealing to metropolitan progressives than their own base. Reform UK has positioned itself as the answer to these contradictions, offering clear policies that reflect genuine conservative principles rather than focus group compromises. The party's growth isn't accidental, but the predictable result of filling a vacuum left by conservative retreat from conservative positions. The polling data suggests that British voters understand something that their political leaders seem determined to ignore, that effective opposition to Labour's progressive agenda requires unity on the right rather than fratricidal warfare between conservative factions. The 7-point lead for a theoretical coalition represents the electoral reward for political maturity and strategic cooperation. Yet the incentive structures of contemporary politics work against such cooperation. Farage benefits from being the outsider challenging both the Conservative establishment and the Labour government. Bad Enoch gains nothing from admitting that her party needs reforms help to remain competitive. The rational individual calculations that benefit each leader personally work against the collective interests of British conservatism. This is a classic problem of political coordination that has destroyed conservative movements across the democratic world. Individual rationality produces collective irrationality, ensuring that progressive parties face divided opposition rather than unified conservative alternatives. The British right seems determined to repeat the mistakes that have handed power to the left across Europe and North America. The defection of Danny Kruger represents more than the loss of one MP. It signals the beginning of what could become an avalanche of conservative departures to reform. Each defection weakens the Conservative Party's institutional credibility while strengthening Reform's claim to represent the future of British conservatism. The momentum is building in ways that could prove unstoppable if Conservative leadership continues to resist the political realities revealed by polling data. Kruger's new role leading Reform's preparations for government sends a clear message about the party's ambitions and timeline. This isn't a movement planning for permanent opposition, but a political party genuinely preparing to govern. The appointment of a former Conservative MP with government experience to lead this preparation demonstrates Reform's seriousness about translating electoral success into effective governance. The language used by Kruger in announcing his defection, the implications extend beyond Britain to the broader pattern of conservative politics across the Western world. The fragmentation of the right has become a consistent feature of democratic politics, enabling progressive parties to govern despite representing minority positions on most major issues. The British situation offers a test case for whether conservative movements can overcome these coordination problems or whether they are doomed to perpetual defeat despite electoral plurality. Lord Ashcroft's polling provides the empirical evidence for what many observers have suspected, that British voters are ready for conservative governance but require conservative politicians mature enough to deliver it through cooperation rather than competition. The 7-point lead represents the electoral reward for political wisdom. The continued fragmentation represents a penalty for political foolishness. The momentum is building towards some form of conservative realignment, whether through formal coalition, electoral pacts, or the continued migration of conservative politicians to reform UK. The question isn't whether this realignment will occur, but whether it will happen soon enough to prevent Labour from consolidating power during a crucial period of national challenge. The stakes couldn't be higher. Britain faces economic uncertainty, demographic transformation, international instability, and cultural upheaval that requires strong conservative leadership guided by clear principles and practical policies. The fragmentation of the right makes such leadership impossible, while handing initiative to progressive forces that have little understanding of the challenges facing ordinary British families. Danny Kruger's defection represents a tipping point in this process of political realignment. The first Conservative MP to make the jump has created a precedent that others will surely follow as it becomes increasingly clear that the future of British conservatism lies with Reform rather than the institutional Conservative Party. Each additional defection will accelerate this process while making resistance seem increasingly futile. The 7-point polling lead for a Reform Tory coalition represents the electoral potential of unified Conservative politics, but realizing this potential requires a kind of strategic thinking and personal sacrifice that seems increasingly rare in contemporary political leadership. British voters are ahead of their politicians in understanding what's required. The question is whether political leaders will catch up before it's too late. The writing is on the wall for anyone willing to read it honestly. The Conservative Party, as currently constituted, cannot deliver the kind of policies that conservative voters demand. Reform UK represents not just an alternative but the future of British conservatism. The polling data confirms what grassroots activists have understood for years, that electoral success requires unity around conservative principles rather than competition between conservative factions. Yet the established political class continues to resist this realignment with a desperation of people fighting historical inevitability. The Conservative Party hierarchy seems convinced that they can somehow restore their former dominance without addressing the fundamental failures that have driven their supporters to seek alternatives. This delusion ensures continued decline while making Reform's eventual dominance of the right increasingly certain. The 7-point lead revealed in the Ashcroft polling isn't just a number. It's a glimpse of what British politics could look like if conservative leaders possessed the vision and courage to unite around common purposes. It's also a reminder of what British conservatism is losing through petty rivalries and personal ambitions that serve no one's interests except Labour's. The transformation is accelerating whether political leaders acknowledge it or not. British conservatism is realigning around Reform UK rather than the institutional Conservative Party, and this process will continue until it produces either a unified conservative movement capable of governing or a permanently fragmented right that hands power to the left by default. The choice remains with political leaders who still have time to shape this process rather than merely react to it. But time is running out, and the electoral mathematics revealed by Lord Ashcroft's polling won't wait for politicians to overcome their personal differences and strategic miscalculations. The 7-point lead for a Conservative coalition represents the reward for political maturity. Continued fragmentation guarantees a penalty of progressive governance by default. That's a reality of contemporary British politics, as revealed by the latest polling data. Conservative voters understand what's required. Conservative politicians need to catch up before it's too late. The stakes are nothing less than the future direction of British governance and the survival of conservative politics as a meaningful force in national life. The question isn't whether this realignment will continue. The momentum is too strong and the incentives too clear. The question is whether it will happen fast enough to prevent Labour from consolidating power during what could be the most crucial period in British politics since the Second World War. The answer lies with political leaders who still have the opportunity to shape events rather than merely react to them, but that opportunity won't last forever. There you have it, the political earthquake that's reshaping British conservatism while the Westminster establishment sleeps. The numbers don't lie, the momentum is building, and the implications are staggering. If you found this analysis compelling, make sure you're subscribed to UK Connors because this story is far from over, and you won't want to miss what happens next in this fascinating drama of British political realignment.